welcome to Bloomberg Quint. You're watching Insolvency Diaries. Now there's yet another twist in the Essar Steel insolvency case. Former promoters, the Ruias, have now offered to pay up all dues owed to the creditors, which means secured, unsecured, operational creditors, everybody, just days after the Committee of Creditors approved ArcelorMittal as H1 for the company, and the COC is in the midst of negotiating ArcelorMittal's bid. Whether or not the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code allows a withdrawal of an application, as the Ruias have suggested at this stage. To understand that, let's go across to Shardul Shroff, Managing Partner at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, and Nilang Desai at AZB. Both of them are joining us on the phone line now. Mr. Shroff, you have been representing the COC, so you might, are you going to respond to our questions in your advice as an advisor of the COC or an independent capacity? If you can give us that disclaimer first, and also at this stage, does the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code allow for a withdrawal of an application?
At the outset, I must say that I will be speaking in my personal capacity and not in my capacity as the legal advisor to the Committee of Creditors, because I have not spoken to them, nor do I know what action they will take. So with that caveat, I would like to state my views. My view is that the press release and proposal of Essar Steel Limited promoters is completely out of order and cannot be entertained by the Committee of Creditors or by the NCLT or by the Supreme Court of India. And I have 4 to 5 reasons to say why this is so. So would you like me to elaborate right now?
Yes, please. Can you state your reasons? And before I can even you can give me your reasons, sir, could you also incorporate in your views whether or not an applications or insolvency proceedings that started before the June amendment, which even provided or, gave the amendment to the Insolvency Code of withdrawal of an application, can the amendment apply to applications that were filed before June 2018?
Yeah, so my position is thus that the issue under Section 12A arises now, and therefore whether the filing of the insolvency petition was done in May, June of 2017 is not relevant for the purposes of discussing the issue of withdrawal, because the law is quite clear now that the withdrawal is only possible after before the stage of the expression of interest, and once the expression of interest procedure aspect has happened, there is no question of withdrawing it, even with the consent of 90% of the creditors. So any proposal as made by Essar Limited falls foul of Section 12A. It falls foul of Section 29A for the reason that this is a backdoor method of trying to participate after the subterfuge of new metal has failed and has been seen through by the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India held that new metal is a front company for the Ruias, and therefore they directed that they can only participate on the basis that all the NPAs of the Ruia group are cleared. Now, if you look at it that way, the press release is clearly stating that they're only willing to pay the amounts of Essar Steel Limited, and they are not talking about the dues or NPAs of other companies like Essar Projects, Essar Power, and other companies which are NPAs for the banking system. So by virtue of putting in this proposal, they are seeking to mislead the lenders to the effect that my proposal is superior, I am paying the operational creditors, while not pointing out that the value of the NPAs in other SR group companies is much more than the value payable or intended to be paid to operational creditors. So this is a device in my view and will not go through. My fourth reason is that the Supreme Court has clearly limited the consideration of what has to be done next with two conditions. One, that the payment should be completed within 2 weeks, and two, that only 3 applicants or 3 bidders will be considered on the basis of resubmitted bids, the case of New Metal, the case of ArcelorMittal, and the case of Vedanta. So the question of now bringing in Essar in a different guise or in the context of termination of insolvency cannot arise because the Supreme Court's directions are very clear to the Committee of Creditors of what needs to be done next. Having held that New Metal is the alter ego of Essar, and therefore Essar was effectively represented in the Supreme Court, this aspect of trying to now come up and state that I am willing to clear my dues is mala fide. So this whole attempt is a backdoor attempt, having failed. And the last reason I would give is that the payment by ArcelorMittal has already been done, and the lenders have received it. The lenders have gone into a negotiation. And lastly, the voting is to be completed today, and the decision of whether the lenders have already approved of it by 66% majority will be known by today evening. So at this late stage, to try and scuttle the voting is mala fide, and this will amount to an act of contempt of the Supreme Court's judgment, and I strongly believe that this is not going to fly.
Okay, all right. Thank you for laying out your reasons, Mr. Shroff. I will go across to Nilang in just a bit. For the benefit of our viewers, the section under which Essar is claiming to withdraw this making its case to withdraw the insolvency process is Section 12A, which allows for the withdrawal of an application which is admitted under Section 27, and the regulations lay down, the process that any, applicant has to follow to make a case of withdrawal. And it clearly says that application for withdrawal shall be submitted to the IRP before issue of invitation for expression of interest and accompanied by a bank guarantee towards the estimated cost incurred for the purposes. Nilang, how are you looking at this press release? Do you consider this last-ditch effort by the Ruias to retain control of Essar Steel, possible on any grounds?
I have to say, I mean, if this was a movie, it could not have been scripted better, quite frankly, the amount of twists and turns that this one has had. But yeah, I think just to answer your very initial question, Paswani, about whether on a strict reading of the law itself is this permitted, and I don't think it is, because 12A says that you can withdraw, but as per the regulations that may be prescribed, the regulations came out and said you can do it before the EOI, and the EOI was supposed to be done 75 days, but that's not immediately relevant here. But I think the regulations said that these regulations come into effect for only IBC processes after the date the regulations came in, which is in June. So reading the IBC with the regulations, 12A and the attendant regulations don't apply really to the Essar case. But that's by the by, because I think, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Mr. Shroff said, because on all other counts also, it's going to be impossible, as I see it anyway, for this to be reversed.
Okay, Mr. Shroff, 12A is known to all of us, to Essar Steel, their lawyers and everybody, right? So there's nothing new in the language that we are now contemplating whether or not Essar Steel can make a case to retain control. The Ruias can make the case to retain control of Essar Steel. So what seems to be the end game here? At a time when you've only mentioned that the COC is, voting on ArcelorMittal's proposal, what seems to be the end game? Is it a way to then take this to the Supreme Court and contest this in any fashion?
Yeah, the attempt would basically to, scuttle this whole process, disregarding the fact that so much time and cost and, interest overrun has happened in this intervening period since the offers were expected to be opened, right since February, March of this year. And in trying to sort of rely upon the principle that we are trying to maximize the value of Essar Steel, because with this proposal they will try and contend that, look, I have paid more, or I am willing to pay more than anybody else, and therefore I must be allowed to pay and seek the withdrawal of the insolvency itself. This is almost the same game that has been played in Binani Cements, and curiously the advisors in both the cases are the same. So in this, as I believe that this is another attempt to essentially try and defeat the procedure prescribed and the manner in which insolvency RFPs are to be closed, and in a sense the regulatory completion has to be achieved. So this sort of last-minute, last-ditch kind of proposals are basically to try and scuttle the entire process and then cause confusion in a sense, where either the NCLT steps in and says something which may be violative of the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court's sympathy is sought to the effect that I am the highest payer. But this is contextual in the sense, as I mentioned, that if you aggregate all the other NPA values of Essar Power, Essar Projects, and Essar Ports, and any other petitions which are filed or lodged before the NCLT for recovery of a CIRP process, then this is clearly an attempt to defeat the law, because under Section 29A, you were required to pay off all your dues before you could be considered as an eligible participant. Now, trying to sidestep Section 29A, they are trying to seek a withdrawal on the basis that I am not going to be a defaulter if I pay everything, but without really looking into consideration that what was the issue judged by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court judged them on 29A and they were indirect parties. So having lost in the Supreme Court, they can't do this now.
True, but even if they were to increase the amount, sir, the window given by the Supreme Court was 2 weeks. Is over. So that window is over.
So that's an extra additional hurdle to them.
Right.
That the window they were given 2 weeks to clear everything. They have not done this by the new metal, and therefore they can't use the guys now say that, look, we were there in our capacity as new metal, but now we are coming as promoters of Essar Steel, and therefore give us a second chance. That is not permissible.
Okay, so they can't increase the amounts at this stage. They can't use 12A. Nilang, how do you see this proceeding, given that, the COC is maybe as we speak voting on ArcelorMittal's bid right now?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, the way I see this playing out is how does Essar do anything at this stage? You can't walk into the Supreme Court and say, can you please use Article 142 powers and get this company out. So the way I see it is, they must have been advised that 12A is a weak argument, but you throw in a letter, you oblige the COC to react because they have to. I mean, these are thousands of crores that are being offered in excess of the existing bid. The COC then says yes or no. Irrespective of what they say, someone's going to go to the NCLT. Or indeed, the COC may itself go to the NCLT and say, listen, we are not clear. Can you help us clarify this question of law? Whatever the NCLT says is going to be appealed, unless, of course, Arcelor throws down the towel. And then it finally goes to the Supreme Court. At that stage, I would have thought what the Essar team would do is then ask for consideration of Article 142 and request the Supreme Court to pull this company out of the IBC. But I think, as Mr. Shroff was saying, how does the Supreme Court do that? How does it sort of override, its directions? How does it get the money back from for the Uttam Galva creditors and give it back to ArcelorMittal? Or does it say, sorry, that was tough, I may have asked you to direct you to sort of give the money there, you did, and now tough luck, you lose the company as well. I mean, that just seems so ridiculously unfair. At the end of the day, of course, this all lands at the Supreme Court because, they're infallible for a reason, right? They're ultimate. So we'll have to wait and see what they eventually tell us. But the way I see it, I think this is only the first of many steps by the Ruias.
All right, as both of you are pointing out, their argument seems to be on flimsy ground, but nonetheless, we will have to go through the litigation pipeline. Mr. Shroff, Nilang, thank you for joining us here on Insolvency Diaries. And before we let our viewers go, there's a statement coming in from ArcelorMittal as well, stating that we have cleared and settled our dues of Uttam Galva and KSS Petron and have the bank guarantees in place for the payment of Essar Steel. And we expect the process to continue as per the clear terms of IBC. They have also said that Section 12A does not apply to the resolution process of Essar Steel, and the section clearly states that any application must be submitted prior to issuance of the invitation for expression of interest and must be accompanied by a bank guarantee for the specified amounts. As Mr. Shroff has pointed out, that would have to be the entire outstanding dues of all the Essar companies and not just Essar Steel, even at this stage, if the courts or the COC have to consider this last ditch attempt by the Ruias. Thank you for joining us here on Insolvency Diaries.